Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
I'm Stephen Carroll, and this is Here's Why, where we take one news story and explain it in just a few minutes with our experts here at Bloomberg.
We are still importing Russian LNG, and this has to stop.
We have to be faster because every payment is filling Putin's war chest. This cannot be.
We support Ukraine to fight the Russian aggression war. It's very strange that we finance Russia by importing their oil and gas.
Hungary is a landlocked country. We cannot neglect the energy coming from Russia by pipelines. Half of the Hungarian needs of energy are coming from Russia.
In 3 years, oil revenues from Russia have gone down in Europe by more than 90%. Now we're turning that page for good.
Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022 tore up Moscow's relationship with much of the rest of Europe. Weaning the continent off Russian gas has been a key part of that rupture, and it's been a long and painful process, which now looks likely to end in 2027. Here's why Europe is taking years to phase out Russian gas. Our EU energy reporter John Ainger joins me now for more. John, first of all, how important were Russian gas supplies to Europe before 2022?
I think it's just hard to state how important Russian energy supplies were to the EU. I mean, this is something that has been building since the 1970s. Back then, the Soviet Union and West Germany at the time struck a deal, gas for pipelines. And since then, you've really seen Europe building its reliance on Russian supplies. So in 2021, before the invasion of Ukraine, Russia made up around 45% of the EU's demand for gas. This was coming through several different routes, but mainly via pipeline through Ukraine and, of course, Nord Stream into Germany. So it was a lot. It was very cheap. It was powering much of German industry. It helped Germany be the industrial superpower it is today. Overall, around 150 billion cubic meters of gas was coming from Russia to the EU. And just to put that in perspective, it's quite difficult to visualize, but that's around like 4,000 Empire State Buildings. Just wow. And also, I mean, it's around 1,500 LNG tankers worth of gas. And to put it in comparison, the next biggest supplier, Norway, was barely half of that. And that's just gas. I mean, Russia was also responsible for much of Europe's demand for coal, around 50%, and also around a third of its oil supplies were coming from Russia. So it was really, really a significant amount.
So how much has changed since then?
I think it's important to note as well that things were already beginning to change before Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. The summer before, we saw Russia beginning to manipulate energy markets in the EU, and that was beginning to have quite a significant impact of prices. But clearly, it was the invasion in February 2022 that was the major catalyst. And Europe was very quick in acting, realizing that its addiction to Russian energy supplies was simply not something that could be sustained. And so it's been quite a dramatic shift. And I mean, you had a meeting of EU ministers, it felt like every couple of weeks in the months coming after that. And they were basically trying to work out ways of how they were going to end this addiction, if not by going cold turkey, by speeding it up very, very quickly. And so we saw the EU adopt a number of different things. Clearly, there were some sanctions that came primarily in the field of oil and coal. Gas was not sanctioned in the immediate aftermath, but the EU did put in place a number of other measures to try and diminish quickly its reliance on Russian gas. A number of countries decided no longer to buy Russian gas anymore. They acted unilaterally on that front. And you also saw the EU, which at the same time is trying to green its economy. It was negotiating a bunch of EU climate legislation. They actually decided to double down on that. So they decided to massively speed up the rollout of renewables. More renewables means less gas. They also decided to put in place a lot of different measures to boost energy efficiency, such as by renovating homes. Of course, it did also come with a number of side effects. Europe's energy costs hit record highs. Gas prices, the cost that you and I paid to heat our homes, increased dramatically. we saw the EU put in place rules to massively curtail its gas demand in order to make it through the winter. But you also saw the side effect of that was that much of Europe's industry also started shutting down, and it hasn't really recovered fully since. All that to bring us to where we are today. The EU is still importing gas from Russia. It was around 45%, and now it's come down to around 13%.
Which I think a lot of people will still find surprising, that we're this far into the war in Ukraine and Russia is still supplying some gas to Europe. So why has this process taken so long?
So the gas that comes via pipeline drop off significantly. We obviously saw explosions in the Nord Stream pipelines, and even before that, gas had stopped flowing through them. We saw at the end of last year the final direct pipeline route from Russia to Europe in terms of gas that came through Ukraine. That got finished. But we did see a massive increase in LNG supplies coming from Russia. So why has this final pocket of Russian gas been so difficult to get rid of? Well, the EU did sanction oil and coal. It's been unable to do that with gas because sanctions require unanimity among the EU 27 member states. And so while most EU member states support the goal of getting rid of Russian gas supplies, notably 2 countries, Hungary and Slovakia, have consistently said that they would block any sanctions on Russian gas. These are 2 landlocked countries. They can't easily get gas from other places outside of Russia. They're connected via pipeline. And they also have 2 leaders which are still quite close to Russia. So that's been the fundamental challenge in trying to get rid of that last pocket of gas.
So EU energy ministers have now agreed a plan to finally ban Russian supplies completely by 2027. How's that going to work?
It's not via sanctions. As I said, sanctions require unanimity. So before the summer, the Commission was working really, really hard on trying to work out ways of how it could circumnavigate this block from Hungary and Slovakia. So they came up with quite a clever solution that would still ban all Russian gas coming to the EU, starting with short-term contracts by the end of this year, no later than the middle of next year, and then all long-term contracts by the end of 2027. And the beauty, in the Commission's opinion, of this measure is that it only requires a qualified majority of member states.
So no one country can block it.
So no one country can block it. There were some concerns about this as a tool, whether it would be able to act as a so-called force majeure, which would mean that it would put an immediate halt to contracts, companies that have contracts with Russia. There was concern maybe it might not work, but the EU has consistently said that this is a strong enough tool that it will result in no more gas coming from Russia to the EU by the end of 2027.
What happens if there's a peace deal to end the war in Ukraine? Is the EU likely to turn back to Russia for gas?
Right now, we have these 2 elements. We've got the sanctions on LNG and we've got the ban on all gas by 2027. One of the things that Energy Commissioner Dan Jorgensen has expressed to us in several interviews is that the beauty of the ban by 2027, unlike sanctions, is that it doesn't need to be renewed every year. In theory, when it is fully passed and enshrined into EU law, it means that Russian gas will be permanently banned from coming to the EU unless there's a majority of member states that decide to overturn that ban. We have seen such strong support in the EU for this measure that is a significant hurdle to reach. And I think as long as Russian President Vladimir Putin is still in the Kremlin, it seems very tricky to see how that would be possible. Of course, over the summer, we did see some growing speculation that there might be a peace deal between Russia and Ukraine. But the message from the EU is quite clear at the moment that they see this as a ban that will come into effect and not change anytime soon.
OK, thanks to our EU energy reporter John Ainger. For more explanations like this from our team of 3,000 journalists and analysts around the world, go to Bloomberg.com/explainers. I'm Stephen Carroll. This is Here's Why. I'll be back next week with more. Thanks for listening.